everyone, it's Jared here, and today I want to talk to you about the different types of drum students that we encounter at Drumeo. Now, over the past 20 years of teaching, I've got a chance to work with thousands of students, and knowing what type of student you are is going to help you determine the areas that you may want to focus on, the areas that you're really weak at, and the areas that you're really strong at. So before I get into it, I want to say that there's not one of these that's really better than the other. So everyone is unique and we all have our own ways of doing things or learning things. But having self-awareness about how you learn the best and where you want to go with your drumming can just give you a lot of clarity in what you choose as your next steps. So the first type of learner is the one that I'm most familiar with because I feel like I just identify with all the little things I wrote here, and that is the technician. Now the technician, they're really good at planning, they're really good at being disciplined, they like things that they can measure, right? And generally technicians are actually really good teachers as well because they're really good at taking the process of learning something and then figuring out what those steps are to get to that end result. Now the things that the technician isn't really good at is improvisation, although that's something I really want to be good at. Musicality, so it doesn't necessarily sound like, let's say, a guy like Steve Jordan. I wouldn't really classify him as a technician, but he's got unbelievable musicality and unbelievable creativity. Although he has great technique, I wouldn't necessarily put him in that category of being just a fantastic technician. And so if you are a technician, like myself, I'd really try and focus on taking the technique that you've learned and trying and find ways to use that without even thinking about it. And so I find a lot of people who are technicians, they'll play a groove and then they'll want to play a fill and they want to use their finger technique. It doesn't actually sound good. It's not actually musical, and so it's way too forced. And the whole purpose of learning this language of music is to learn vocabulary and then be able to play it on the drum set without thinking about everything you're saying. Just like right now, I'm not necessarily thinking about every word that's coming out of my mouth. I'm not thinking about the spelling of the word. I'm not thinking about what word goes before what other word. It's just naturally kind of bleh. Right, Ross? It's just naturally bleh. So if you are a technician, really focus on trying to make it come out in a musical way and not actually thinking about it. The next type of learner is the naturally talented. Now, there's a lot of people that they say they don't like these types of people and they should, go take some lessons from a teacher, or they're kind of upset at them and they make them want to quit playing drums. But a lot of you out there, you're probably very naturally talented. And I find that these types of learners, they're really good at improvisation. They're really good at musicality because it's likely that a lot of what they play on the drum set is coming from their upbringing. So whether they were exposed to a lot of music when they're kids, like a guy like Tony Royster Jr., for example, is super naturally talented. And he talks about sleeping in his dad's guitar case when his dad was doing rehearsals and stuff like that. And so you can imagine that a lot of what he was intaking at that very young and impressionable age was things that he was going to later use in his development as a drummer and as a musician. And so it's not something that he necessarily practiced or worked on or measured like the technician, but it's something that he just naturally has. And so, like I said, they're really good at improvisation, musicality, and lots of different styles. They can just hear something and play it. Now, what they're really not as good at is they're not as good at the theory side of things, like especially understanding what they're playing. They're not really as good at technique because they're not really thinking about what techniques they're doing. Although if you think of a guy like Tony Royster, he's unbelievable technique. So there are exceptions to all of these rules, right? Teaching. I find that a lot of naturally talented drummers, and we have a lot of them on Drumeo, they're really good at storytelling. There's a lot we can learn from them, but when it comes from them wanting to teach us a rudiment and how to develop that rudiment and then how to take it and use it on the kit and then how to use it within musical settings, they don't really think about the steps to where they got. They more think about, I'm just here and I'm enjoying it. So they're also really not good at measuring and not as good at planning because they're just more improvisers, creative people. They're really good at musicality. So are you a naturally talented drummer? Be honest. I'd love to hear where you kind of classify yourself. The next is the DIY learner. Now, these people are really good at experimentation because they're going at it alone. They're not necessarily following a specific curriculum, and they're comfortable with that. They're fine just figuring it out on their own, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. Because of that, they're very, very creative, and I find from like the people who want to do music for a living, the DIY learner is generally better at networking, meeting new people, going to shows, just because they have this more kind of freedom within how they approach the instrument and stuff like that. Things that they're not as good at, again, like the naturally talented, theory, technique, because they're not really having anyone review what they're doing. They're not as good at styles. They're really not as good at teaching because they don't even know what the process is. They're just kind of figuring it out as they go for themselves. And I find that a lot of these DIY learners, they message me and they struggle with independence. And so I find more DIY learners, people just doing it all by themselves, they're hitting more ceilings in their drumming. And if they're not being pushed by working with a specific band or something like that, then they generally hit ceilings and they really struggle to push through those. The next type of learner is the wannabe pro. Now, I hate using the term wannabe. It's not really, I'm trying to make it a derogatory term or anything like that, but it's more like someone who desires to do music or play drums for a living. Now, this type of student, they're really good at practicing. They're really good at putting their head down and building practice plans and stuff like that. They're really good at musicality. So if they have the desire to be a drummer in a band, generally they have some good musical chops. They're really good at improvisation. They're really good at learning different styles. Now, some of the things that they struggle with, and you'd be surprised maybe, but I see a lot of people who want to play drums for a living. They're actually not that good at networking. They're not really good at business, and a lot of them don't have as good of a work ethic. Not necessarily a work ethic compared to like how they practice and how they plan their practicing, but more of a work ethic behind what it actually takes to be a professional drummer. And we have professional drummers in the house all the time here. And when you look at how hard they work and what they do outside of just playing drums, it's incredible. So wannabe pro drummers generally think that it's just sitting down and playing drums all day. I swear, people still think that's all that I do. It's like, I don't come to work and play drums. I go home and play drums after a stressful day at work. Okay, running the business here, it takes a lot of different time on just the administrative side, the networking side, the planning side, the strategy, the vision, learning all these different types of things that are really, really important if you want to make a profession out of what you're doing. And so if you are a wannabe pro, I'd really focus on, yes, practicing. You have to be good, but really focus on developing yourself in the business side of things and figuring out what you need to level up on to get to that next level. So the final type of student is the professional. And believe it or not, professionals still take lessons. This is actually the sign of a professional, is that they still practice, they're still learning like crazy. I remember chatting with David Garibaldi over the years, and he's in his 70s now, and he's one of the most studious students. He's just always practicing, he's always refining his technique, and this guy is like on the Million Gig March with Tower of Power, just an absolutely brilliant drummer. So the good thing is they have good business skills, they have really good work ethic, they have theory, they have technique, they're good at styles, and a lot of professionals are actually really good at teaching. It's hard to find someone who's equally great of a drummer as they are as a teacher, but they are out there. Now I find that a lot of these professional drummers, especially ones that have been doing it for a really long time, they get a bit cynical. And especially as the music industry is changing, and it changes so fast because now information moves much quicker than it did in the past. You no longer have to record something, put it on tape, then send it to a replicator, and then you send it to a store, and that's how you get your information out there. Now you can literally get a phone, you can record yourself, you can put it out instantly. And a lot of these professional drummers don't really like that. So they become opinionated, they become set in their ways, and they just, I find it sometimes a little bit sad, but I know it's nothing is like it used to be. But I think professional drummers need to get better at adapting and changing and not complaining about it, but welcoming it and being open to learn new things. So next, I'd like to know, what type of drum student are you? Are you a combination of a few of those? Let me know in the comments below. I'm going to be reading all of them and I'm going to be responding to a ton of them. So please leave a comment below and I'll see you in the next video.